In January 1949, a man named Clement Mathieu arrived at a boarding school in France. The school was called Fondelang, which means bottom of the pond. Mathieu was not a young man anymore. He was short, had little hair, and his clothes were old but clean. He carried a small suitcase and a leather bag for his music papers. He was a music teacher, but life had not been easy for him. He wrote his own music, but no one famous wanted to play it. He needed a job, any job. So, he came to this school for boys who had problems. The school was a large, old building made of gray stone. It looked cold and unfriendly. There were tall trees around it, and the sky was often cloudy. Inside, the halls were long and dark. The walls were painted a dull green. The windows were small and had bars on them. It was always quiet, but it was not a peaceful quiet. It was the quiet of fear and sadness. The headmaster of the school was Mr. Rakin. He was a tall, serious man who always wore a black suit. He had a rule for running the school: action, reaction. This meant that if a student did something wrong, the punishment would be fast and hard. He believed this was the only way to control these difficult boys. He did not talk to the boys, he shouted at them. He did not smile. The boys at Fondelang were between 6 and 15 years old. Their parents were gone for different reasons. Some parents had died in the war. Some were too poor to feed their children. Some just did not want their children anymore. The boys were sent here because they had no other place to go. Some of them stole things or got into fights. People in the town nearby were afraid of them. They called them wild animals. But inside the school walls, they were just lonely, confused, and often scared children. On his very first day, Mathieu saw Mr. Rakin's action. Reaction, rule and action. An old man named Mr. Chabert was the school's caretaker. He was kind but often the target of the boys' pranks. That day, a boy named Leclerc had played a trick. He put a trap on the door of the caretaker's room. When old Mr. Chabert opened the door, something fell and hit his eye. It was an accident, and Leclerc did not mean to hurt him badly. But Mr. Chabert's eye was injured and bleeding. Mr. Rakin was very angry. He called all the students to the main hall. He shouted at them. "Who did this?" he demanded. No one answered. The boys stood in straight lines, looking at the floor. "Very well," said Mr. Rakin. "No one will leave this room. No one will go outside. No one will have any free time until the guilty person confesses. You will all stand here until someone speaks." The boys stood for hours. Mathieu, the new teacher, stood with them. He felt uncomfortable. He saw the fear on the young faces. He saw how some of the smaller boys were shaking from standing too long. Finally, one boy, whose name was Corbin, could not take it anymore. He was not the one who hurt Mr. Chabert, but he was tired and hungry. He said he did it, just so the punishment would stop. Mr. Rakin did not ask more questions. He took Corbin away for a severe punishment, solitary confinement in a small, dark room. Mathieu learned his first lesson about the school: fairness was not important here. Order was everything. Mathieu was given a class to teach. It was not a music class, it was a general class. The boys were supposed to learn reading, writing, and math. But they had no interest. When Mathieu walked in, they laughed. They passed notes. Someone had drawn a funny, ugly picture of Mathieu on the blackboard. Mathieu did not get angry. He calmly erased the picture and started the lesson. But the boys did not listen. Then, a boy named Mondain, who sat at the back, started making a low sound like a frog. Other boys laughed. Matthew asked him to stop. Mondane just smiled. Matthew's briefcase, which was on his desk, suddenly disappeared. The boys had a system. They passed it under the desks from one boy to another very quickly. Matthew could not catch it. Finally, he saw it was with a small boy who looked scared. Matthew went to him and took the briefcase gently. He did not punish the boy. He just said, "Thank you for finding it for me." The class was surprised. They expected shouting, but there was none. That night, Matthew lay in his small, simple room. The room had only a bed, a desk, and a chair. He could hear sounds from the dormitory where the boys slept. They were talking and laughing. Then, he heard them singing. They were singing a song, but it was not a nice song. They had made up rude words about the teachers and the school. They sang about Mr. Rakin's bald head and Mr. Chubert's bad eye. Matthew was a musician. He listened closely past the rude words. He listened to their voices. Some voices were loud and rough. Some were soft and clear. They were not good singers, but they had energy. They sang together, creating a kind of wild, unhappy harmony. An idea began to form in Matthew's mind. These boys were full of energy and emotion. They needed an outlet, a way to express themselves. Maybe music was the answer. Maybe through singing, they could find something better than anger and pranks. The next day, during his class, he did something unexpected. He said, "Today, we will not do math. Today, we will sing." The boys looked at him as if he were crazy. "Sing? Why?" asked one boy. "Because it is good for the soul," Matthew said simply. He asked all the boys to stand up. He played a single note on a small pitch pipe he carried. "Now, everyone, sing this note after me," he said. He sang "ah." Some boys made funny sounds on purpose. Others sang very softly. Matthew listened carefully to each boy. He walked around the room. "Good," he said. "You," he pointed to a boy with a deep voice, "you have a low voice. You will be in the group called basses. You," he pointed to a smaller boy with a higher voice, "you have a high voice. You will be in sopranos." He divided the boys into groups, high voices, low voices, and middle voices. Then there were some boys who could not sing a correct note at all. They made everyone laugh. Matthew said, "You are very important too. You will be my human music stands. Your job is to hold the music sheets for the others. And you," he said to a boy who was completely tone deaf, "you will be the assistant conductor. You will help me turn the pages of my score and hand me my baton." He gave every boy a role. No one was left out. At first, the boys thought it was a big joke. They laughed during practice. But Matthew was patient. He wrote a very simple, short song on the blackboard. It was just a few lines with an easy melody. "Let's try this," he said. He taught them line by line. Slowly, the noise turned into something resembling music. The boys began to pay attention. They wanted to get it right. They liked the feeling of creating a sound together that was not shouting or fighting. One boy, however, never opened his mouth. His name was Pierre Morange. He was about 12 years old. He had a thoughtful, almost sad face and very clear blue eyes. He always sat by himself. He did not talk much to the other boys. Matthew had heard from another teacher that Pierre's mother was a beautiful widow who worked very hard, and Pierre was sent here because she could not handle him. Pierre was not a troublemaker in the usual way. He was just closed off, like a book that no one could open. Matthew noticed something special about Pierre. Sometimes, after class, when Pierre thought he was alone, Matthew would see him cleaning the classroom. And while he cleaned, he would sing quietly to himself. His voice was not like the other boys' voices. It was pure, clear, and very beautiful. It sounded like a church bell on a quiet morning. Matthew was amazed. This boy had a true gift. Matthew tried to get Pierre to join the choir. "Pierre, you have a wonderful voice," he said one day. "We need you in the soprano group." Pierre just looked at him coldly and shook his head. "I don't sing," he said, and walked away. Matthew did not give up. Instead of forcing him, he used a different way. One afternoon, he asked Pierre to come to the music room. He said he needed help moving some chairs. When Pierre arrived, the room was empty. Matthew was sitting at the old piano. "Pierre," Matthew said gently, "I heard you singing. Just once, for me, sing this note." He played a note on the piano. Pierre stood still, his arms crossed. He did not want to. "No one else is here," Matthew said. "It will be our secret. Just try." Pierre looked at the floor for a long time. Finally, he opened his mouth and sang the note. It was perfect. It filled the small room with a warm, golden sound. Matthew's face lit up. "That is magnificent, Pierre. You have a gift from God. Do you understand?" Pierre did not look happy. He looked almost angry. "My mother says I'm good for nothing," he muttered. Then he turned and ran out of the room. Matthew understood then. Pierre's pride and anger came from pain. He did not believe he was worth anything. Matthew decided he would help this boy, not just for his voice, but for himself. Meanwhile, the choir was becoming popular in the school. Matthew wrote more songs for them. He wrote a song about night and dreams called "Look at Them Fly." The words were simple but full of hope. The boys loved this song. They sang it with more feeling than any other. When they sang together, their faces changed. They looked focused, even happy. For a few minutes every day, they were not problem children, they were singers. The change in the boys was small but noticeable. They fought less in the yard. They were more willing to do their chores. Music gave them a common goal and a sense of pride. They started to call themselves Matthew's Choir. Mr. Rakin saw these changes but did not understand them. He did not like music. To him, it was useless noise. However, he had to admit that the boys were quieter and caused fewer serious problems since the choir started. So, he allowed it to continue, but he watched Matthew with suspicion. He thought Matthew was too soft. The smallest boy in the school was named Papinot. He was only about 6 years old. He had big, round eyes and carried a small teddy bear everywhere. Every Saturday afternoon, he would take his small suitcase and wait by the front iron gate. The other boys knew why, but no one told him. Papinot believed his father would come to pick him up. The truth was, his father had been killed in the war. Papinot's mother had died when he was a baby. He had no one. But every Saturday, he waited with hope. And every Saturday evening, when no one came, a teacher would gently lead him back inside. Matthew's heart ached for little Papinot. He often sat with him at the gate, telling him stories until it was time to go in. Then, a new student arrived. His name was Mondain. He was 15, older than most boys there. He had a hard face and cold eyes. He was sent to Fondelang because he had been caught stealing many times and had run away from other schools. Mondane did not care about rules or teachers. On his first day, he looked at the other boys with a mocking smile. When he heard about the choir, he laughed loudly. "Singing? That's for babies and girls," he said. Mondane quickly became a problem. He stole small things from other boys. He threatened the younger ones. He tried to destroy the choir's morale. During practice, he would make loud noises to ruin the singing. Matthew tried to talk to him. "Mondane, you have a strong voice. You could be a good bass singer," Matthew offered. Mondane just spat on the floor and walked away. One day, money went missing from Mr. Rakin's office. It was not a lot of money, but it was enough to make Mr. Rakin furious. He questioned all the boys. Mondane, very cleverly, hinted that another boy, a shy boy named Langlois, had taken it. He said he saw Langlois near the office. Langlois was terrified and could not speak well. Mr. Rakin, without any real proof, decided Langlois was guilty. Following his reaction rule, he gave Langlois a terrible beating and put him in solitary confinement for a week. Matthew knew Mondane was the real thief. He had seen Mondane acting suspiciously. But he had no proof. He felt helpless and angry. He realized that his music could create an island of peace, but it could not stop the real evil that someone like Mondane brought. The worst happened a few nights later. Matthew's most prized possession was his music notebook. In it, he had written all the songs for the choir, including his favorite, "Look at Them Fly." One evening, the notebook was gone from his room. Matthew was devastated. He knew Mondane had taken it. He found Mondane alone in the yard. "Give me back my notebook, Mondane," Matthew said, trying to stay calm. "I don't know what you're talking about," Mondane said, smiling his cold smile. "Those songs are not just for me. They are for all the boys. Please." Mondane laughed. "Your stupid songs? I burned them. They're gone." Matthew felt a surge of anger and sadness. He turned and walked away. That night, he could not sleep. In the middle of the night, he was awakened by shouting and the smell of smoke. "Fire! Fire!" someone yelled. The school was on fire. Mondane, full of hate and wanting revenge on everyone, had set fire to a pile of papers in the basement. Panic took over. Teachers ran to wake up the students. Boys jumped out of bed, coughing. They all ran outside into the cold night. The fire was not huge, but the smoke was thick. Thankfully, all the boys and teachers got out safely. The firemen came and put out the fire. Part of the basement and a ground floor classroom were badly damaged. The next morning, Mr. Rakin was like a raging bull. He had lost face. The school board would be angry. He needed a scapegoat. Mondane had run away during the chaos. So, Mr. Rakin turned to Matthew. "You," he shouted in his office. "This is all your fault. Your permissive ways, your silly music. You made the boys soft and disobedient. You encouraged that monster Mondane. You are fired. I want you out of here by noon today." Matthew tried to explain, but Mr. Rakin would not listen. Matthew's heart was heavy. He had failed. He had wanted to help, and now he was being thrown out like a criminal. He packed his few things into his suitcase. He looked sadly at the empty music stand in his room. He would miss the boys, especially Pierre's voice and little Pepinot's hopeful eyes. He was not allowed to say goodbye to his class. Mr. Rakin made sure the boys were kept in their classroom with the door locked. Matthew walked slowly down the main stairs, carrying his suitcase and his now empty leather music bag. He felt like a ghost. No one was there to see him leave. As he walked across the courtyard towards the big front gate, he looked up at the school building. The windows of his old classroom were closed. He thought, they don't even know I'm leaving. Or maybe they don't care. A deep sadness filled him. Just then, something flew out from one of the closed windows. It was a paper airplane. Then another, and another. Dozens of paper airplanes came sailing down from the windows. They landed softly on the ground around Matthew. He picked one up. On the wing, written in a child's handwriting, was a name, Corbin. He picked up another, Langlois. And another, "Thank you, Mr. Matthew. We will remember you. Goodbye." Tears filled Matthew's eyes. Then, he heard music. From behind the closed windows, the boys began to sing. It was "Look at Them Fly." They sang it beautifully, with more feeling than they ever had before. Pierre Morin's voice, pure and strong, led the song like a bright light in the gray day. They were singing for him. They were singing him goodbye. Matthew stood there, listening, his face wet with tears. But he was smiling. He knew then that he had not failed. The music was still inside them. He had planted a seed of beauty in that hard place. And it had grown. He waved towards the windows, even though he couldn't see the boys. Then, he picked up his suitcase and walked out of the gate. Just as he was about to get on the bus that would take him away, he heard a small voice. "Sir! Sir, wait!" He turned. It was little Papinot. He was running as fast as his short legs could carry him, dragging his small suitcase. His teddy bear was tucked under his arm. Papinot stopped in front of Matthew, panting. He looked up with his big, serious eyes. Today was Saturday. "Sir," Papinot said. "Can I go with you? Please?" Matthew looked at the boy, then back at the cold school, then at the hopeful, waiting face. He knew Papinot's story. He knew the boy would wait at that gate every Saturday for a father who would never come. Matthew did not have much. He had no family, no secure job. But he had a kind heart. He smiled, a real, warm smile. He put down his suitcase and held out his hand. "Yes, Papinot," he said. "You can come with me." Papinot's face lit up with a joy brighter than the sun. He put his small hand in Matthew's. Together, they got on the bus. As the bus drove away from the bottom of the pond, Papinot looked out the window, not back at the school, but forward to the road ahead. For the first time in a very long time, he was not waiting anymore. The story of that winter at Fondelang did not end at the gate. Mr. Rakin was not spared. The school board investigated the fire. They heard stories from other teachers about his harsh rule and the action-reaction method. He was fired soon after Matthew left. The bottom of the pond got a new headmaster, someone a little kinder. Pierre Morin's life was changed forever. Before he left, Matthew had written a long letter to Pierre's mother. He told her about her son's incredible talent. He begged her not to let this gift be wasted in a reform school. He even included the music for "Look at Them Fly," which he had rewritten from memory after Mondane burned the original. Pierre's mother, who loved her son deeply but had been lost on how to help him, listened. She worked even harder and managed to take Pierre out of Fondelang. She sent him to a serious music school in Lyon. Pierre Morin went on to study at the Great Conservatoire de Paris. He became one of the most famous conductors and musicians in France. On the night of his first major concert in Paris, As he stood before a grand orchestra, he received a package. Inside was an old, slightly burned music notebook. It was his, the one Mondane had stolen. Someone had found it and kept it all these years. With it was a note that simply said, "From your assistant conductor." That night, he included a small, simple choral piece in his program, "Look at them fly." He never forgot the kind, bald music teacher who saw the angel in a troubled boy. As for Clement Matthew, he never became famous or rich. He taught music at a small primary school in a quiet town. He lived a simple life. Little Pepinot, whose real name was Jean-Baptiste Matthew, became the father Pepinot had always waited for. Pepinot learned to play the piano and always loved music. Many years later, an old man named Jean-Baptiste received a diary in the mail after Matthew passed away peacefully in his sleep. It was Matthew's diary from his time at Fondelang. Reading it, Jean-Baptiste finally understood the full story of that winter. He learned about the struggles, the small victories, and the deep hope his adopted father had carried. He looked at an old, faded photograph that fell from the diary. It showed Mr. Matthew, looking young and a little tired, surrounded by all the boys of the choir, standing on the school steps. They were all smiling. At the bottom, Matthew had written, "Fondelang Choir, January-May 1949. The night will pass, and hope is not in vain." The music teacher did not change the world. But in that cold bottom of the pond, he gave a group of forgotten boys a song to sing. And sometimes, that is enough to help a soul learn to fly.